For our COBT viewers and listeners, it's Maynard, Mike, and Arjun here with something we're super excited about. We're going to talk today with Jillene Connors Belopolsky. She's the Chief of Staff and the Chief External Affairs Officer at the Clean Cooking Alliance. We got connected through mutual friends. This is an issue that I feel like you can tell in the name what we're probably going to talk about, which is so much of the world is not using stoves and energy in a clean way. They're forced to use things which have too much smoke, too much inhaled smoke. It's a terrible health risk. It's just darn it not good. And this issue, the Clean Cooking Alliance has been around for 15 years, and they've really made it their business, for lack of a better way to say it. So Jillene is here. She's shown us a lot of stuff. She's told us a lot of stuff. We really are excited, Jillene, to have you. And as I say, this is an issue that I feel like people know at a 50,000 foot level, but you educating us on what it is really like and what you're doing, it's going to be fantastic. So thank you for coming.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
And it's fun to have you in person.
Yeah.
We don't always have in person, so that's great. Okay, Mike Bradley, what's happening with you, my friend?
What's happening with me is everything is doing fine. The market is literally straight up and to the right. It seems like that's something that's been going on.
I can't remember you saying something.
No, it's look, I mean, I think most people are saying the market seems like it's stretched, but it continues to just keep going up. And it seems like the only thing that's going to stop the markets right now doesn't seem it's like it's going to be earnings. Earnings were generally good. It just seems like it's going to be world markets, events on the world market stage. And so right now things look like they're up and to the right as of today. And what we saw today was a CPI print. Everyone was looking at the CPI print. It printed right in line with expectations. Tomorrow we're going to get the PPI, and after that, later this week, we're going to get the retail sales, consumer sentiment, jobless claims, such like that. And so it's going to be a really heavy week for economic reports. If the PPI tomorrow reports in line or even below in line, I think what people are going to be looking at is the Fed is going to have to start cutting rates beginning in September. Market expectations, you're going to have 3 rate cuts in this year. As a former hedge fund guy, I was always of the opinion that rate cuts are not bullish for markets. Everyone's expectations about rate cuts are bullish for market. But once you start cutting rates, that usually means the market or the economy is usually slowing down. And so we'll see how things play out here. Like we said, on the broader markets today, they're, Dow's up 400 or 500 points. Markets are up around about 1%. We're at all-time highs, and it doesn't look like anything's going to stop that, at least near term. But like I said, most people think markets are stretched. As far as energy markets, I think, Q2 earnings are behind, and maybe some things that we learned with Q2 earnings. First, oil service, deflation. Most people expected deflation was going to be low single digits. It looks like for the second half of the year, that is creeping up to mid-single digits, and some thinking it could be high single digits as we enter 2026. As far as E&Ps, maintenance type capital spending is where people are going towards. And I'd say E&P managements in general are concerned with the second half of this year. That's why we've seen rig count drop quite dramatically. But on the other hand, I think most E&P managements seem to be taking a pretty constructive tone in this in sort of mid-2026. So we've got to kind of work through this period here with the next 4 or 5 months. From a refiner standpoint, I think they look fantastic in the second half of the year. And the reason why is you're just going to have a lot of OPEC barrels hitting the market. That means wider differentials. That's going to be a net positive for refiners. So the setup looks really good. Midstream, we're seeing a lot of large-scale projects coming about. In the electric utility, in Q3, they're going to start announcing what their plans look like. Their 3 and 5 year plans. They're going to keep going up. And so we're going to hear that in their Q3 earnings. And I think the last thing is on IPP companies. The expectation bar is really high. If you're not out announcing PPAs, long-term PPAs with big companies, AI companies, your stocks are not reacting. So the bar is really high here. I think that's unfair, but that's the market we're dealing with right now. As far as crude oil, we're around $63. Crude oil just continues to migrate lower. And the reason why is people are concerned, we've got 2.2 million barrels of stated oil production increases. I think most expectations that we have somewhere in the 700 to 800,000 barrels a day that are on the market today. We'll see if those stated production increases actually, result in actual increases. And I think that's how the market's going to basically start to think about things. The interesting thing is today OPEC came out and actually raised their demand estimates for next year by 100,000 barrels a day to about 1.38 million barrels per day. That was a surprise. On the other hand, you had the EIA came out with their short-term energy outlook today, and they lowered their 2026 Brent oil price expectations from $58 to $51. If we see $58, that's really, really bad for the U.S. In the world. If we see 51, I mean, rig count's going a lot lower. The U.S. Industry really comes to a standstill, really starts to decline quite substantially. So we'll see how things play out. The last thing I'd say is we haven't talked about it in quite some time, natural gas prices. Today, natural gas prices, prompt is around 275. The strip is around 350. We haven't seen those levels since 2024. Cooler weather's out there, higher than expected gas production. So, the gas market, I think medium-term outlook is really good. Short-term outlook, I think it can go anywhere. And so gas prices are pulling back. Some of those equities are pulling back. So that's kind of a wrap of what we've seen into Q2 earnings, and we'll hand it back to you.
It's quite a lot. The difference between OPEC's projection of increase and the IEA saying 51, that's pretty incredible. Okay, well, Jillene, you're seeing this is, how we make the sausage around here. Arjun, what would you add in before we jump in with Jillene?
Maynard, I might just tie in our guest today with sort of how we viewed the world through our super spike lens. And as you know, Maynard, we started with the tagline of a messy energy transition arrives, and all of our sort of critique and skepticism that you could very quickly go out of fossil fuels only into renewables by arbitrarily short time frames, and all the uncertainty on new technology ramp and so forth. But we actually switched the tagline at the start of this year from that tagline to everyone on Earth deserves to be energy rich. We spent a lot of time going through these macro forecasts and forecasting things ourselves and just observing how little energy the rest of the world really uses. And it's very easy, and we spent a lot of time, as does everyone, on here's the ramp in China and here's the ramp in India. And at least you can say, in the case of a country like India, 1.4 billion people, while they're moving up from poor to middle class, at least they're moving up. And you can see the GDP growth rates, and you can paint a brighter outlook. We've been diving into the continent of Africa, and really the numbers are just staggering in how little energy they actually use. So you can quickly throw off a stat that in the rich world, we use 13 barrels of oil. Places like the US and Canada use 20 plus, Europe's 10, China's 4, India's 1.4, Africa's 1.1, but that's a number that has barely changed over the 50 years this data goes back. And when you disaggregate that data, the 1.1 barrels per person of oil that an African uses, again, contrast that with the 20 plus we use, a lot of that is centered in the countries that actually produce a lot of oil. So if you strip out the Angolas, Algerias, Libyas of the world, you're talking in a lot of these places, they're using like half a barrel of oil per person. There's one country that's using 0.1 barrels per person. Maynard, that's 4 gallons of oil. That wouldn't get you to the Jersey Shore and back from where I'm at, right? And they got to live their whole lives and the whole year on that de minimis amount of energy. And so when you look at the energy needs of the world, our tagline is everyone deserves to be really as energy rich as the lucky 1 billion of us. You, Maynard, Mike, everyone on this Zoom, everyone listening to this COBT, we are super lucky. When you think about raising the living standards of these folks, there is a long way to go. There's a massive energy need. And I'm really excited today, at least we're going to get to the topic of clean cooking fuels. And when you think about some of these organizations that have tried to limit the use of natural gas and other definitely cleaner cooking fuels than burning your biomass, people just need to spend some time with these numbers. They are staggering. There's a long way to go. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Maynard, to get into our conversation today.
Well, that was great. Arjun, we had to have you in this discussion. So I'm so glad that we do. Jillene, this is maybe one place to start. I'd love for you to, of course, give us an overview of the Clean Cooking Alliance, but also maybe talk about your own personal interest in doing it, because it's clearly a mission, and it's a great one. So we'd love to hear about not just the overall organization, but your own story.
Yeah, thanks. And I think I'll start there. And thanks for that fantastic sort of intro and segue. I think for myself, my story is similar to others who uncover that reality and start to unpack that reality around what energy poverty actually is. So I've worked in the energy industry my whole life, but I'm not an upstream engineer. I'm not a economist. I studied philosophy. And my question was really around how we enable people to live the best lives of their choosing. And I was really trying to understand the barriers that actually limit economic development freedoms. And the more I unpacked that, very early on, at the age of 20 years old, I realized that energy was the key to unlocking prosperity. And so I sort of switched gears. I moved to Houston, which was the energy capital.
Yeah, what a story. I mean, you were literally a philosophy major.
Absolutely. I have
Yeah.
a degree.
So
in
some people say
philosophy.
I'm into, but
Nope, I have
you're
a
capital P.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And really consumed with that existential question. And I moved to Houston. I started working at the Baker Institute here with Amy Jaffe, who was leading it at the time, and developed a program on energy poverty, really looking at how we assess the opportunity cost and how the industry can start providing solutions so that we can unlock prosperity through energy access. And I spent my entire career working in sort of the private sector, in consulting and in nonprofits towards that mission. And I think it's fantastic to see that energy poverty and the conversation around energy access is making its way into the mainstream energy transition discussion and broader energy and climate dialogues, but it's still almost predominantly focused on access to electricity. And so we're all often talking about grid connections, mini grids, solar home systems, and all of those things are important, but as Arjun was alluding to, they're only one piece of the puzzle. And we've made incredible progress on electricity. We now, globally, it's about 675 million people without access, and there are ambitious national and multilateral programs like Mission 300 that are really aiming to close that gap. But we know
that's astounding. I mean, just pause on that for a second. Like 600 and almost 700 million people don't have power.
Oh yeah, and
I mean, that's wow. Obviously, a couple of United States in there.
Yeah. And that doesn't account for those that have unreliable or erratic powers. That's the minimum.
But leave California out of this.
Yes, no, we're not going
there.
We're not going there. But so that's a staggering number. Layer on top of that 2.1 billion people, that's 1/4 of the world's population, have no other choice but to cook with polluting fuels like wood, charcoal, kerosene, dung. That's an enormous number. So access to electricity doesn't automatically equate to access to clean cooking. And the consequences of that are dire. We're talking about 3.2 million premature deaths each year. That's more than HIV, malaria, and TB combined. It's 500,000 deaths of children under 5 globally each year. We're talking about 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's the same as the global aviation or shipping sectors. And it's 50% of global black carbon emissions. So it's the single largest controllable source of black carbon on the planet. We know that 30+% of wood that's harvested for fuel, so for wood, charcoal, is done so unsustainably, where landscapes cannot replenish that. So it drives forest degradation, it impacts land, soil, water, and biodiversity. And women and girls are disproportionately affected, spending up to 20 hours a week collecting wood, or 30% of their household income purchasing fuel. So this has an enormous economic toll for the global economy, and it's estimated at $2.4 trillion each year in damages and lost productivity.
So can I just ask you something? Because when you go through those key points and you just listen to it for a second, and you have, disproportionately affecting women, you have killing people, you have contributing to, CO2 in the atmosphere, the carbon in the atmosphere, leading for people to, cut down trees and, which if you just listen to all that and why the world, you just kind of go, why has the world not been throwing billions at this instead of the world, I mean, it just sticks out as like, this has everything. If you were looking to do good, putting $1 into this just looks like, holy smokes, it's a grand slam. It has multiple bad things in one topic.
It is one of the most underinvested health and environmental challenges in the world. And we have made progress. So, I mean, that's a dire picture to paint. We have made progress. Since 2016, 600 million people around the world have gained access to clean cooking, driven mainly by progress in developing Asia, China, India, Indonesia. In Africa, we're actually seeing the number of people without access growing by 14 million a year, because despite progress, population growth is too rapid there to keep pace with it. So the sector has been held back a little bit by the complexity. It's multiple fuels, technologies in countries with very complex environments to operate in. But a lot of it, I think, does have to do with the fact that it's an energy issue that predominantly affects the poorest, most rural women and girls around the world. And it's been difficult for both governments, investors in the private sector to prioritize that amongst other issues.
Well, I think this is why we're so excited about this, because I mean, you've educated us, so you've made us more excited. But excited, I mean, to tell the story and to get into the specifics, because for some reason, like we were saying, this is something that people kind of know, but we're not going after it like we could. Could I get you, maybe this would be a good time, you brought some pictures. At one point I asked if you'd bring a stove. The team thought I'd lost it. But we've got some pictures that Albert can take us through, and it just really illustrates, for those of you listening, turn on your video right now. We're gonna just take a little tour of some of these products and some of these situations.
Yeah, and I think why Albert brings that up, one of the good things about clean cooking is that it isn't one solution. So on the one hand, people get frustrated that there's no silver bullet, no one size fits all, solution. But we actually have an entire suite of fuel and stove combinations that can serve every customer in every market. And so the definition of clean cooking actually refers to that combination of fuel and stoves that meet the emissions performance that's defined by the World Health Organization and the ISO guidelines for indoor air quality. So there's actually a sort of technical performance standard.
It's not just, it feels cleaner.
No, it is actually clean at the point of use. And so we have a whole spectrum and suite of solutions that we can utilize. We've got a picture up here right now that is of an induction cook stove that's being used. This is electric powered cook stove, multiple burners. It is fast, it's smokeless. This is the type of technology that we want people to transition and aspire to. And it absolutely can be affordable in places where you have reliable electricity connections. So there are lots of markets where this is the aspirational solution that we're working towards, but countries like Nepal are rapidly transitioning their electricity sectors and driving demand for e-cooking as a way of moving away from imported gas. And Tanzania, Uganda are actually piloting programs and looking at special e-cooking tariffs to make this type of solution increasingly viable, especially in urban and peri-urban areas where the electricity infrastructure is being built up. So that's a sort of one look of where we'd like to go. On the other end of the spectrum, this is what people think of when they most often think of clean cooking or cook stoves. This is an improved biomass cook stove using wood here. These are manufactured stoves that can either burn wood, charcoal, or biomass pellets much more efficiently, reducing smoke and particulate matter and reducing the amount of fuel used. So this is often a stepping stone for households and communities where there are no other clean fuels available.
Can I just ask while we have that picture up? So like a stove like that, what would it cost?
These stoves range anywhere between sort of $20 to $75, depending on the market and the manufacturer and the model. So very often manufactured locally. Burn Manufacturing has fantastic operations across Africa and is producing these stoves to millions of households. So it really does depend on the range and the model, though, but much more affordable than the upfront cost that customers historically would have to pay for an LPG stove and a full canister of LPG. That was really prohibitive compared to your sort of daily purchase of wood, charcoal, or another type of biomass fuel. So when we look at an LPG stove like here, what we're seeing is a smart meter on top of that canister that allows this customer to prepay for the fuel that she's using with mobile money. And so this actually reduces that high upfront cost of purchasing the entire stove and the cylinder and allows this company to maintain control of the cylinder and customers to be able to purchase small incremental amounts of fuel to pay for that over time. That has been a game changer for LPG, what we refer to as pay-as-you-go cooking models.
And phones are prevalent. I mean, people have phones. I mean,
yes,
right?
Yes, mobile money is taking off across the continent. Countries like Kenya, Rwanda, Ghana, Nigeria have fantastic systems. It's not everywhere, but it is for LPG, ethanol, and electric cooking, one of the technologies that is really unlocking affordability and access. Here we have an example of ethanol fuel being distributed in Kenya. There's a company, Cocoa Networks, that has built a market serving over 1 million household customers in Nairobi with an ethanol stove and a canister that can be refilled through Cocoa Points, which are ATMs, fuel ATMs in local corner shops, again, making it really easy for customers to pop in, on their way home from work, fill up the canister with as much fuel as they need or can afford, and bring that home.
So that ATM looking thing, it's attached somewhere to a tank?
Yeah, so it has a tank inside the ATM.
It is while you're in the convenience store and you just fill up.
Absolutely. It's a safe bottle.
Like a big gulp, but you get your ethanol.
One of the fascinating things about this business model is these Cocoa Points were actually redesigned recently because the business realized that the majority of customers coming in to refill them were children on their way home from school with their canister before coming home for dinner. And so they actually lowered the screen and the point so that children could easily refill their ethanol bottles and bring them home. Now we're on to biogas. So we sort of looked at some solutions that I think are more prevalent and relevant for urban and peri-urban households. In rural and agricultural areas, domestic biogas systems, so these are biodigesters that use agricultural and animal waste to produce a clean burning gas and a nutrient-rich fertilizer, can actually transform the lives of farmers. And this is an example of a company, Sistema Bio, who's actually installed over 13,000 of these systems across Africa, empowering over 80,000 households with clean energy. So this, again, is a really sleek, monitored, designed system. They can keep track of all of the gas that's being produced and distributed to the households, what's being used. And so there's a lot of technology-enabled solutions here that are reducing customer costs of these technologies.
That biogas one, I assume that's pretty expensive?
The biogas systems...
Not the... Well, I'll let you answer.
Yes, yeah, the biogas systems do tend to incur a sort of higher upfront initial investment, but there are fantastic innovative financing mechanisms, including carbon finance, that are allowing companies to pre-finance those and get the carbon revenue benefits back to customers to reduce the overall cost.
So one, I know we need to talk about the economics and the money and all that. Maybe one way to go that direction is we saw some of the company names as you went through that. Would you mind talking about the industry participants, the stove makers, anybody that you think is interesting in in the supply chain, if you will.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to know who's involved with this.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the clean cooking ecosystem, and when we start to sketch it out, it's an enormous ecosystem map. On the one end, you have the actual stove manufacturers and the fuel suppliers and the last mile distributors. And the Clean Cooking Alliance has worked really, really closely with this network over the last 10, 15 years to support them as they trial new business models, pioneer technologies like PAYGO, LPG, enter new markets. We have a portfolio of around 29 companies operating in 19 countries right now, working across all of the fuel and technology types we just described. And so these companies include Burn Manufacturing, ACE, BioLite, and EnviroFit that are really working on incredible improved cook stoves, high tier cook stoves that are an entry point for a lot of households in the market. And we have the ethanol value chains, and Cocoa Network, as we showed there, is the pioneer of the PAYGO ethanol that we saw the distribution model there. Biogas, we have Sistema is a leader in home biogas systems, as well as home biogas that's looking at smaller residential systems. On the electric cooking side, there are companies like ATEC, Burn, PowerUp, and EcoSafi that are really delivering very sleek tech-enabled electric cooking devices. And on the LPG side, we have PAYGO Energy, B-Box, Circle Gas, M-Gas that are delivering pay-as-you-go LPG to consumers all over Africa, and really making previously unattainable major upfront LPG purchases equivalent to the daily cost of purchasing a bag of charcoal.
So when you get, you showed the ethanol fill up, but like if you're getting a LPG tank, is it typically like delivered almost like propane, if you will, to your house, or do you have to go and, I know it's probably different in so many different places, but how do you get your LPG?
Yes, so the LPG service models vary quite widely from sort of country to country, market to market. We have a lot of companies that we're working with that are focused on that sort of direct to customer service, where they can actually monitor the level of your LPG tank, come in, swap it out when you're running low, and they maintain the control over that tank. And that's a customer service that we're seeing emerging, particularly in urban centers where you have a high concentration of customers. But the majority of customers who begin to access LPG will have to travel to their sort of local refilling point to exchange a canister. What we want to avoid is what we see in many places around Africa, is these sort of unregulated LPG refilling, partial refilling, utilizing canisters for far too long. So we do a lot of work with partners and governments that are upgrading storage and distribution networks, creating new cylinder recirculation models and regulation that controls sort of the safety around cylinders.
So what country, and not to ask you to choose your favorite or anything, but what's a country that has really stunned you with either how fast or how competently or how full-fledged they have made changes?
So I think Kenya is always a shining star example of what happens when you prioritize achieving universal access to clean cooking and start putting an enabling environment in place, an enabling policy and regulatory environment that can unlock and attract investment. And that's why we've seen so much growth in enterprises and an increase in access in Kenya, because they've really made it a national priority that sits with the president and is elevated to the highest levels of ministerial objectives. And they're doing the work to make sure that taxes, tariffs, regulations around carbon markets, whatever it is that's related to clean cooking, is actually supportive of their goal to achieve universal access by 2028. So they set an ambitious target and they actually started putting policy in place that enables investment in the private sector to thrive.
That's great. So an issue like this, I was just thinking about, like, who are your supporters, like, the key donors and participants in your world. And just to jump ahead, this seems like if you ever, hopefully someone in Hollywood sees this, but this has like this, there's so many issues that it just seems like you would draw so much money because, like, wow, what a great cause. But there's a question in there somewhere, I'm sure, Jillene. But just talk to us about your supporters and how we get more.
Yes. So, I mean, unfortunately, despite these impacts and despite, I think, the emotional sort of reaction to when people find out about energy poverty and what it really looks like, and unless you've stood in a kitchen while someone is lighting a 3-stone fire and you stayed there for hours while they're trying to cook that meal, it's really difficult to comprehend when you look at those statistics. But despite that, the sector has received a fraction of the investment that it needs. It's traditionally been thought of as a health or humanitarian issue that, development agencies and multilateral development banks will resolve on their own, not an energy market issue. So it's received a fraction of the funding and the commitment. We estimate that to achieve universal access by 2030, the sector needs an annual investment of about $10 billion a year. Sounds like a lot of money.
Well, not
relative
current standards.
Exactly. Not relative to the rest of the energy sector investment. But today.
And it's doable, unlike some of those other forecasts. This one is doable.
Yes. So we're $10 billion a year was the estimate. Right now, the total public and private investment into the sector sits only around $2.5 billion a year. And that's not enough. And in Africa, where the need is the greatest, I think in 2023, we tracked about $675 million of direct investment into clean cooking value chains. So it's not enough. We really do need more and more diverse and patient capital going into the sector. So we know that these business models work. We're seeing companies' revenues grow. We're seeing them attract capital, but it's concentrated in a handful of companies, and it's mostly debt capital that they're raising. We're seeing sort of equity and grants stalling. So that's limiting innovation, the ability to enter underserved markets, to invest in the necessary value chains. And so there's a real moment here for the sector to reassess their role in addressing clean cooking access.
Maybe just an observation, maybe you can correct me on this, but it seems to me when I think about what you guys are doing, it's a very simplistic thing. It seems like it's very easily achievable if we just set our minds to it. And it feels like a lot of organizations try to chase the impossible and spend billions and billions and billions at something that will never happen. And it just doesn't, it's just an observation. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think the world is facing many, many challenges, and it can be overwhelming to know where to direct resources. We've certainly, in the clean cooking space and within the broader energy access space, have been facing an issue of scarcity and competition. And there are many great organizations that are working on various aspects of energy access, whether it's electrification, electricity for productive uses, access to clean cooking. But the pot that we've all been drawing on is very, very small. Yeah. There now is, I think, a recognition from national governments that clean cooking isn't just a nice to have. It's central to their economic prosperity, to their environmental, objectives, to their climate goals, and they cannot develop without ensuring real access to clean cooking solutions, and they're prioritizing that. So it's frustrating in a way because it is simple. We're not waiting for a major technological breakthrough. We have the knowledge. We have a whole suite of technologies we can rely on. It really is a matter of deciding that it's a priority, and we're willing to put the right type of capital in place to allow these enterprises to grow and enter new markets, to build out the value chains that can actually support long-term fuel use and move people up this energy ladder.
And maybe I'll call out some of our energy friends, but it seems to me I mean, you've got a energy secretary who basically put out bettering human lives. It really seems like this kind of fits right in with that. And you also had Toby Rice and Scott Tinker doing this Energy Core 50-50-50 vision. It sounds like all of those are heading in the right direction. Maybe you can talk about your optimism that you have someone that's sitting in Washington, D.C. that is probably a proponent of what you're doing, and some other energy guys that are taking up this cause. I mean, are you guys working in collaboration? Is it giving you a lot of confidence that, people are actually looking at this?
Yes, absolutely. I think we've been really successful in raising awareness of this issue and starting to generate momentum and commitments. And we see, our energy secretary elevating this, the IEA, the G20, both recent presidents, Brazil and South Africa, have clean cooking as a major issue on their G20 platform. So we're seeing it elevated to a level that we haven't before, and that is fantastic. But what we want to make sure is that these types of commitments, so for example, the IEA hosted a summit on clean cooking in Africa last year that mobilized $2.2 billion in commitments for clean cooking. It was a major, fantastic international affair, brought a lot of people together, a lot of commitments there. But we want to ensure that those commitments now translate into real investment, real infrastructure build out, and real action, and not be in a situation where, we're sort of clean cooking washing. It's a nice thing to be talking about. People want to do something, but don't know where to start.
Yeah.
I was wondering if I could ask you about a lot of the emphasis in the last few years, and I mentioned this in my opening remarks, was around this sort of climate question, and we have to solve the quote climate crisis and the net zero narratives. And from my perspective, was if you're a corporation and we advise companies on strategy, you don't want to just go down that road especially if that's not your area of expertise. And we thought a lot of the strategies and approaches were misguided when it came to net zero. I'm not asking you to comment on corporate strategy or necessarily affirm or deny my view. I'm curious how that sort of uber focus on climate the last few years impacted your work. Did it detract from the underlying mission of everyone deserves to have clean cooking fuels? Were you hamstrung at all? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth of it has to be quote clean and net zero for people to deserve access to this stuff. I'm just curious for any observations you have of how that very strong climate narrative that the world operated under from sort of, I'd say 2019 to 2023, 2024, how it either did or did not impact the work you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, interesting question. At the Clean Cooking Alliance, we take a very pragmatic and neutral approach around national self-determination and the self-determination of consumers to choose the fuels and the pathways that best meet their needs in their local context. There's of course been debate over, whether LPG is a clean cooking fuel despite its fossil nature. We did a lot of work to understand the climate impacts there and demonstrated that despite it being a fossil fuel, a full transition to LPG cooking for those who don't have access is a climate win compared to the baseline of unsustainable biomass use. And so when we really looked at the big picture there, and one of the things about clean cooking is that it has so many cross-cutting impacts. It does have a positive climate impact. It has a positive health impact, a gender impact on land use and forest degradation. And so we've actually really tried to keep the focus on the benefits to the people that need access to this full range of fuels and not necessarily get bogged down into a wider existential net zero debate.
That's actually really helpful. Let me ask one more question, Maynard, because I was struck by the $10 billion number, and my instinct was that's a small number, meaning doable. And your comment is we're barely getting 2.5. It is a stretch to get to $10 billion. It doesn't sound like it's donations. It sounds like it is capital, it's business models. How do we bridge that gap? 10 to me seems like a very doable number.
Yes, I think it's doable. It's a gap right now that we need to fill, and it's a combination of capital. I think we still need grants. We still need support for organizations like the Clean Cooking Alliance that is actually doing that foundational market building work that then enables and unlocks private investment into markets and the ability to support those enterprises. I think without that ecosystem building work, we're still going to run into a little bit of a pipeline problem, because we're the ones that are working with national governments to help them set those targets, to actually develop viable plans and mobilize the finance to do that. But it's a combination, and it is actually doable. We're seeing now the government's prioritizing that. We're seeing a whole mix of innovative financing approaches and new players coming into the space, enterprises delivering really, really fantastic consumer-focused business models. We just need all of this to come together. And that's the role that the Clean Cooking Alliance plays as a sort of sector coordinator.
Do countries grab you and say, gosh, just give us the framework. Like, tell us which laws to change. Tell us which, just put it in the structure, because I assume that's part of the issue when a country looks at this, is like, we have to create I would guess Kenya, for instance, has a good legal system, right? So do you do a lot of that type of work?
So,
almost like policy advice to countries?
We do, but we do in partnership and at the request of countries. So rather than taking, I think, a traditional consulting type advisory approach that, where we bring in a bunch of, expat consultants to come in, create a plan, drop it on someone's desk and leave, we are actually building the capacity of local leaders to drive forward clean cooking transitions. We've established something called clean cooking delivery units that are small teams of local experts that sit in the highest levels of government. So in Kenya and Sierra Leone, where our first 2 units are established, this team sits in the offices of the president. And they have a presidential mandate and are responsible for coordinating and implementing the entire national clean cooking transition plan, working with all the relevant agencies and ministries, with the private sector, with civil society. And CCA provides the core support in terms of, data, market intelligence, information analysis that helps those teams actually devise and implement plans that work for their country. And then we share learnings across our network so that, Kenya, who is much farther along in their journey, can actually help inform Sierra Leone that is really starting, from a different perspective, because we want to accelerate these learnings, and it helps us bring other regional opportunities together. What can we do in East Africa? And what can we do in West Africa that actually harmonizes taxes and tariffs around clean cooking technologies and fuels? Are there other opportunities for building trade and collaboration? So that's where we're trying to really focus our efforts that can maximize scale and accelerate progress.
That's fantastic. The companies, I wanted to throw out an idea or a question on the companies that you've mentioned that are involved across these countries. Do you ever have, from our old world, there was always an investor conference where you get all the companies together. You mentioned, I think the IEA did the Clean Cooking Summit, but could you imagine, like, we bring all those companies to Houston, we have 2 days, we invite anyone who's interested in the space or in capital going to the space to come and see them and meet them and understand what they're doing. And like, it seems, this is kind of a financial person reaction, but it feels like a good old fashioned conference is in order and to raise some money.
Yes, no, absolutely. And CCA has long hosted the biannual Clean Cooking Forum that brings together clean cooking leaders, practitioners.
You're doing this, of course.
Our last one was in Ghana 3 years ago, and was the largest in-person gathering. We had about 750 people in person, 2,000 people in person, and many more joined online. It is something that has been a moment where we've needed to hold the space to bring the clean cooking sector together and allow those enterprises, those investors, the multilateral development partners to really exchange knowledge and to facilitate partnerships and deals. I think we're getting to the point where we need something bigger than that. So what CCA is actually focused on the last 2 years is how we insert and integrate clean cooking into these other adjacent ecosystems. So, for example, working with the IEA to have them host a conference on clean cooking as part of their broader energy transition approach and network, and leveraging their contacts there. We work with organizations that are focused on nature conservancy, so Africa Parks, Africa Wildlife Foundation, to engage their investors, their donors, because what we need is clean cooking to not be seen as its own separate solution, but actually integrated into the bigger energy access, electrification, nature, climate, health agendas. So we work on capacitating and engaging those other organizations. That said, I think there's a really unique opportunity now for us to engage the wider energy sector and help them understand their specific role in clean cooking access. Because unless you are a Total Energies, for example, with real direct operations in some of these markets, it can be really overwhelming to understand or identify your role.
What do you find? Maybe take us through that. I mean, you're here in Houston and you have worked in energy, and so all your life. And this is something that energy people just instantly get, because everybody in energy understands if I don't have it, man, I'm in trouble. They get that. What is it like when you go see a U.S. energy company, just to pick one in your mind, and go through this conversation, and you get to the end and you say, so what can we do together? Like how do they get involved? Or do they get involved? Like, what do you see?
They're not involved enough. I'll start with that. But I say the ambition is there. I think for me, there are 3 ways that companies can really get involved in this. The first, of course, is direct investment in operations, where you are active in these value chains. So I mentioned Total Energies. They've recently committed $400 million to expanding LPG cooking value chains in Africa and India. And that's a sort of direct extension of their business.
And I'm sorry, is that going to be like they will fund companies that do that, or they will own?
They're expanding their own LPG infrastructure. They're investing in pay-go LPG companies and last mile distributors. There's a whole sort of portfolio of options there.
I mean, this is what's so great about this is this is business.
Yes.
And they will make money doing that. That is not a donation.
No,
So,
that's a purely business decision. And the Italian company, Eni, also has a clean cooking program where they're investing in projects. I think they're aiming 10 million households in 5 African countries at the moment. So those are directly associated with their business lines. And so that's an easy correlation. The second opportunity, and where we've seen companies enter into the clean cooking space, is by including clean cooking in their net zero strategies. And so this takes the form of buying high integrity clean cook stove or clean cooking carbon projects. Over the last few years, there's been incredible advances in methodologies and verification and standards around that really improve the transparency and the integrity of these projects. So we encourage companies to continue to support that. The carbon market is one of the ways that has been supporting the growth and expansion of clean cooking enterprises.
And I know we talked about this. We could do a whole show on just this angle. But maybe just tell us quickly, is that simplistically, I'll buy the stove, you give me the credits? Or how should I think about that, if you will? Or what is that, the exchange? If I'm a company that would like to pursue those credits, how exactly might I get involved? Do I just buy them from? Who do I buy them from? This is interesting.
Yes, there are, on the voluntary carbon market, there are various standards, Gold Standard, Vera, that offer verified clean cook stove projects and credits. And yes, you're purchasing a carbon credit from a project, you receive that credit and can use it on your books. but that money goes to support the delivery of those projects and enables the companies and the project developers to actually reduce the cost for consumers or spread the cost of consumers over time. So it's making these solutions affordable in ways that they haven't been.
So the middleman I buy it from, gets something,
Yes.
but then ultimately that capital is going back to the customers by lowering their costs.
Yes, yes. And so there's a lot of efforts in the new methodologies and approaches to make sure that that benefit sharing and the benefit to the actual consumer is realized. And so we've made a lot of advancements in that area. But that's we have a great buyer's guide on high quality cook stove carbon credits that happy to share with any of your listeners who are interested.
It's so ironic because, and it's not ironic, but so we have a carbon credit and our mentality has developed around that. But what if you said, I would like fewer people to die? I mean, so much good is happening here besides eliminating carbon, where I would like fewer people to die. I would like better standards for women and daughters, all those things. I would like fewer trees to be cut down. Like, we're only selling the credit for one thing.
Yes.
You could quote the credits for all that stuff.
Absolutely.
If that's what people want to put in their sustainability report, or not to sound cynical at all.
So carbon is the sort of fungible commodity that we're
It's like we
leveraging.
always talk about, that there's obviously a focus on one piece of this, and the full piece is compelling.
Yes, yeah, we often talk about co-benefits or combined benefits, but it really is a very cost-effective solution. But I think the third entry point for companies and where we as an organization are shifting our focus and evolving our type of partnerships is directly with CCA. We see an interest for companies that really do want to fund that enabling work. They want to make sure that those policy environments are transformed, that innovative financing mechanisms are developed and finance is flowing into the system, and that there is a whole sea of enterprises, not just these 8 companies that are receiving 90% of the investment, but there's an entire market of enterprises that can support solutions. And that's the work that we do. And you asked me about conversations with a US energy company. Very often I hear that, oh, I don't know where to start, or I only operate in the US and that's outside my remit, which is understandable. Or they spend an enormous amount of time identifying local pilot projects and partners because they want to do something. But imagine investing all that time and energy to transition one school to LPG or electric cooking, whereas the Clean Cooking Alliance has been asked by the government of Kenya and Sierra Leone to develop the national schools transition plan and support the finance mobilization and implementation there that will actually unlock clean cooking for 13 million school children across those 2 countries. So it's really, for us now, it's about helping the industry identify the opportunities that best sit with them and maximize their impact.
That's a really good point, because I was going to ask a question. It's like, it's sort of when an oil major or something goes into a country. I mean, you're talking about years and years of investment before anything gets done. And I sit there and I listen to billions of people have no access. And it seems to me that one of the big variables here is like the government that's in place wanting to basically move their society along. I mean, when you decide you're going somewhere, how big of a risk is it? I mean, do you need the State Department involved? How do you get these companies and countries to basically, really kind of buy into what you're doing, have a stable government over time, because seems to me it's not a 1 or 2 year investment. It's a 10, 20-year type investment for you guys. And so just getting started off it's not that simple.
No, it's not. And I wouldn't begin to understand all the complexities of sort of major energy companies entering new markets and doing deals with national governments. We've been much more focused on ensuring that the governments are positioned and have the capacity to actually attract that investment and to do those types of deals, and that the energy sector wants to come in and work in these places.
For example, like when you had the school system in Kenya, the first one, how long did it take to get from the first one to the nationwide? They want to go ahead and roll that out. Is this a a decade-long process, or how does
I
that?
mean, their goal is by 2028. So we're developing the plan right now and
Yeah.
looking at all the opportunities, mapping out the schools. Where is the opportunity to move schools to LPG?
Yeah.
Where is the electricity system established or being upgraded in a way that we can actually move schools to electric cooking? Are there rural schools that we can actually set up biogas systems? So by strategically mapping those options and then being able to sort of facilitate
Yeah.
the types of partnerships that are needed to deliver that and bring in the right types of investment. That's where we are. And we don't think it should take 10 years
exactly.
because the players are there, the technologies are there. It just means we may need more investment directly in some LPG storage facilities, making sure that the import terminals are set up in a way that we can keep the LPG flowing. So it's just thinking about the clean cooking value chain beyond stoves and what it actually takes to keep that fuel supply, whether it's LPG, ethanol, electricity, going.
And earlier we talked about some companies just trying to do impossible plans. Do you feel like we're back in a situation now where people are saying, you know what, net zero is probably a little crazy, but maybe not going to get there the time frame we want to get to? Maybe we step back and do some more simplistic things like this that we know we can get some results out pretty. Are you seeing the dynamics, the basically environment changing from that standpoint?
A little bit. I think it does contribute to the conversation. We've been really consistent with our messaging that this is a need that isn't new. It's not going away. It's consistent no matter kind of what your driver in the ecosystem is. If you care only about energy access, these are 2 billion people, 2 billion customers that don't have energy to fulfill a basic need. That's a market for you. If you are climate and environment driven, this has a real immediate impact. If you care about health and indoor air pollution, if you care about women's time and safety, so no matter where you're coming from, this is an opportunity for you to make a real difference and in a very sort of cost-effective and immediate way. We know changing out a stove, moving from cooking over a 3-stone open fire to an improved stove or to biogas, LPG, whatever it is, has real, tangible, and immediate health and environmental impacts.
We need to get one backed in here, which most of our audience will have an appreciation for, but most of this LPG is coming from the U.S. I mean, the U.S.'s LPG capabilities, it's stunning. And so some of these companies we're talking about, yes, they're drilling in Louisiana or New Mexico, you pick a place, but some of that product is ending up in these places. So they are connected to these places. What do you find? Do you mind talking about if there are any particular companies in that value chain that you think are starting to find some interesting ways to get involved here? Or maybe you don't want to name names, but it's a big complex. And I could imagine one of those companies, or maybe we could help you organize it. If one of those companies said, you know what, I pick this country, I want to help fund the CCA's efforts to get this country to put everything in place. I want to be that company that helps this country. And you could say, wow, it's a company that helped a country. Like, are those types of things happening? Or tell us some more about the LPG community here.
I think we've worked with a lot of LPG players over the years, doing a lot of sort of research, market assessments, analysis. I think now is a really, really unique opportunity to do, just as you're saying, to have companies step up in a bigger way to really fund that market facilitation work that will ultimately build the demand for their product long term. And it is a nascent market. It does take time. Doesn't make sense necessarily for a US LPG company to immediately go and invest in their own infrastructure somewhere in Africa. That's too disconnected. But as we build that demand, support governments to actually start putting their plans in place. I mean, we estimate that 50% of the people who will gain access between now and 2030 will do so with LPG. It is the most.
Say that, please go through that again. I want to make sure everybody got that.
Yes. 50% of the people that we anticipate will gain access to clean cooking between now and 2030 will do so with LPG. It has been the single largest driver of clean cooking access to date, and it is It's fast, it's clean, it's portable, it's accessible. We know how to make it economic. And so we need to support those value chains. It doesn't have to be at the expense of progressing other solutions as well. We're talking about 2 billion people that need a whole mix of energy. We can still advance electricity access and e-cooking. We can still develop ethanol value chains and support really fantastic economic biogas systems at the same time. And I think, in your own home, think about the different types of appliances and fuels you may use. People still have gas stoves, but they use an electric microwave or an electric tea kettle. And, on a special occasion, they're barbecuing in their backyard with propane or charcoal. And so we need to be realistic around the way people use energy and ensure, goes back to my original philosophical question, that people have a choice in how they develop and how they can live their best lives. And this is all about choice and affordability. And I think in the end, and to be really frank, we should all find it unacceptable that 1 in 4 people on this planet cannot cook a meal without harming their health, their environment, or losing productivity. And to me, that is an energy sector challenge. I mean, just putting it out there, how can the sector not be addressing that?
Can I jump in here? Because I think that mission's really clearly and well stated, and certainly you're not going to get any disagreement for anyone on this Zoom. When I think about economic and energy development, if I think about my career in China, having gone from a poor country to moving up that economic and S curve, it came with joining the WTO in 2001 and all the things. But to me, the starting point has always been there was something within the country that changed. Whether it's government initiatives, initially capitalism along the coast of China as an example, some changes in India, where they then start creating the positive momentum behind their economy. And there was no, to my knowledge, and I don't mean this to be sarcastic, but a gasoline producers alliance that got, Chinese and Indian consumers to use gasoline for their cars, or equivalent on diesel or heating oil. Why isn't that going to be true in this space? I mean, the moral reasons are very clear, and you've well articulated them. But in terms of the impetus to getting economic and energy development, to me, it starts at the macroeconomic level. Why would this issue be different than that? Again, when I think about these other countries like China, India, early in my life, South Korea has gone from poor to middle income to rich. Why does this one require the energy sectors uniquely to care about it, or an organization like yourselves? Why won't it have to start with the governments and the countries themselves?
I mean, it does. It absolutely has to start with the governments themselves. They are responsible for delivering, an enabling environment that can support their economic development and the needs of their people. So it starts there, and that's why CCA focuses on really empowering and supporting governments to do that, and ensuring that clean cooking is a central component of that energy, economic, and climate development goal. But I think when we look at clean cooking progress that we've seen across those countries in Asia, China, India, Indonesia, they managed to transition very rapidly to LPG use because of very heavy top-down government-led subsidy programs. They decided that they're going to transition all these people. They heavily subsidized the fuel, and we saw an enormous uptake. Those economies are very different than the economy of Zambia or Sierra Leone or even Kenya. And so the approach that we see making the most difference, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, is one where you combine really fantastic top-down government leadership and prioritization of the issue with an investment environment that actually allows the private sector to just deliver those products, goods, and services in a way that meets customers' needs. And so it's just a different model, but it absolutely starts with governments taking the lead here, and we're seeing that. President of Kenya, President of Tanzania, Sierra Leone, we have Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, all focused on achieving universal access to clean cooking, leveraging domestic LPG and energy supplies to meet the needs of their populations, and trying to put the right policy and regulation so that the private sector can come in and deliver.
Well, we knew this was going to be fantastic. It was better than fantastic. Anything we didn't hit on that you feel like, Jillene, we ought to close with? Your summation comments, as Arjun was jumping in there at the end, that was about as good as it gets. But any feature of this that we haven't touched on that's an important factor?
I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but I think the takeaway is that clean cooking is the missing piece of the energy access puzzle. It's often forgotten. It's often conflated with electricity access. It's often deemed too complex of an issue to even know where to start.
Because it's so straightforward. It's like, it is not a green hydrogen project with, da 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 da.
Yeah.
This is, there's no tech here.
We have the tech, we have a solution. So I think it's really just reiterating for people that, this isn't just a humanitarian and health issue. It is an energy market issue that deserves real investment, a mix of capital that can support enterprises and infrastructure build out, across all of these value chains. And this is, we'll get there, but without the private sector stepping up, progress will be too slow. Populations are growing way too fast for us to keep pace. And this is a particular moment, I think, for the private sector to really jump in and take a leadership role, because we are seeing development aid budgets shrinking, and we're seeing philanthropy being diverted to a range of humanitarian and conflict crises around the world. And so there is a risk that despite us elevating clean cooking and people making commitments, that we're going to be left with all talk and no action. And I want the energy sector to recognize this as a real unique opportunity. And there are organizations out there like the Clean Cooking Alliance who've been doing this work, who understand the market, that have the relationships with all the stakeholders, who can really help you maximize your impact.
Okay, last question as we wrap up. If somebody watches this and says, this is great, I'm in, plus or minus, what would it cost to fund you into a new country?
I mean,
I know that's a big generic one, but
yes,
but pick a country, and our company wants to help transform that country.
Yeah, I mean, we're not looking at sort of corporate funding or ownership over sort of one country engagement. We tend to support CCA in a way to do all of our core work that does.
So you're going to get a portfolio. You can't have a country.
Yeah, we have a portfolio approach when it comes to our corporate donors, as well as our bilateral.
It could be exciting though,
Absolutely, because then you have the opportunity to be supporting work in Kenya, in Sierra Leone, in Tanzania. But I mean, we look at corporate partnerships that range from $250,000 a year to $1 million plus a year, and support a range of projects related to government capacity building, mobilizing finance, developing sort of standards and testing that enable the sale of products and fuels. And so there's a whole spectrum of things that your work, your funding could help support our work.
Fascinating. Well, yeah, sorry to hit you with like the NASCAR model or something, but that was cool. Okay, the NASCAR, there's a lot of companies on one car, so they don't even have the model either.
We are very open to exploring partnerships with corporate partners that help us leverage your expertise as well. As I said, I spent my entire career in the corporate energy sector. We know how to move fuels. We know how to work with customers. We know how to operate in, complex environments. This is all relevant here. So we want to create partnerships that maximize impact.
And you see all this desire by so many places where people want to improve things. They want to make the world a better place. But the state of Minnesota could give you some money and do more for the environment than laws against gasoline powered lawnmowers or whatever, some of these things that people get off into. This is just such a fantastic way to spend money.
We think so. And we really do hope that we're able to relieve this crisis in my lifetime.
Well, fantastic. We've gone a little past, but that's testament to how much fun we were having. Arjun, thank you. Mike, thank you. And Jillene, huge thank you to you. We hope to stay in touch and do more. We want to do more. I know we can't have a country, but we want to get involved.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to continue our conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.